Welcome to today's webinar, Powering Intelligence in an Integrated World. Sovereignty, which is the second episode in our series on sovereignty under siege. Sovereignty would belong to those who balance energy, intelligence, and foresight. But why energy? Why this topic today? Well, energy fuels everything, as I'm sure you're well aware, from sunlight to supercomputers. The threat of climate change forced nations to consider their energy mix. Now, as AI's hunger for computation rivals nations' energy demands, control over power grids has become control over intelligence itself. Today's webinar examines various pathways to sustainable energy independence, the shift from extraction to integration, from oil and gas to intelligent energy networks. Intelligent energy networks, that's what we're going to talk about today, marks not just a technological transition, but a geopolitical one. So our guest presenter, Michael Wiggin, and he'll be joined by a panel of Martin Green, Leigh Bond, and Roger Marchand, who will be responding to his presentation. And then I'm going to pose some questions to Michael and the panel as a whole, and that will take us about 40 minutes into the webinar, and then we'll open it up for audience questions. And for those of you joining us from elsewhere in the country and elsewhere, other nations, I know Australia is here today, welcome. So Michael.
Well, thank you very much. Well, what I'd like to talk about today is thermal energy systems management, including the role for nuclear. I think it's very important. The first thing I'd like to say is we have a lot of experience in electric networks, gas networks, water networks, sewage networks, but we haven't really got a strong understanding of thermal energy systems and how they might be incorporated. And this, I think, is a big problem. Most of the rest of the world in northern climates, similar heating loads, similar industrialization, they have thermal networks as a major part of their energy system. In a way, building heating is like the garbage dump for energy. We can get it from all kinds of sources, and we have abundant amounts in power plants, industrial waste heat. In the future, we've got data centers coming up. And then the emergence of nuclear power is really important. So I'll get into that. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, I thought an important thing, I'm going to be talking about this part about energy, but I think there's a bigger picture thing available that we got to look at. There's a relationship between GDP growth, growth of material extraction, growth of energy consumption, growth of emissions, and these things are all contributing to climate change problems and also biodiversity problems as well. So I think if we're going to look in the long term in the future, we've got to have a look at this issue about the way that we are growing our economy and whether we should or not. But anyhow, let's get started with the energy systems, but I think we've got to keep an eye on the big picture at the same time. Next slide, please, Barry. Okay. Looking at nuclear, I'm going to focus on nuclear, but to use nuclear, we need thermal networks. And if you got thermal networks, that opens up the door for waste heat from other sources, also all kinds of renewable energy sources. So I'm not here advocating nuclear per se, I'm advocating efficiency. So if we're going to generate 1,000 megawatts of electricity and 2,000 megawatts of heat, it's ridiculous that we don't consider heat. In some countries like Denmark, it's almost illegal or against policy to have thermal electric power plants and throw the heat away. They're required to site and size them next to both heat loads and electric loads. This seems like a sensible idea all over the world, but the nuclear industry has been very cautious. I've talked to a lot of people there, and they're saying, oh, yeah, but we have regulatory approvals. They're used to a business model of producing base load electricity. They're comfortable with that, and they don't want to screw around with it. So I think it's really important to recognize that and understand that we got a major challenge ahead in getting the industry comfortable with what's happening elsewhere in the world. There are about 51 nuclear CHP sites coupled to district heating around the world, and there's no reason why Canada shouldn't be able to do that too. Next slide, please. Okay, what is a heat network? These are happening right across Canada, common around the world, but really they're quite simple. A pre-insulated pipe that can be laid shallow buried 600 millimeters, a meter below the surface. They don't need frost protection. It's just for structural protection. So you put them in, and some places they can go down the street very quickly, shallow excavation, get the pipes in, backfill, and be out of there in a day. It's not always that simple in big cities, but the technology is evolving about horizontal drilling, many other techniques. And also on smaller communities, they also use PEX pipe, flexible high density polyethylene that comes in rolls. And places like Ojibwe First Nation, Northern Quebec, they installed the whole district heating system all themselves. So the technology is evolving and making it easier. Next slide, please. Okay. Um, the big thing, we're seeing is when people talk about energy, they talk about how much it costs a kilowatt hour to produce energy. So energy is fine. And they look at annual energy requirements and figure out how we could get that. But there is a serious problem about not looking at peak load. Uh, if you heating systems, I'll show later, very different than most electric systems, very high peak load in the winter, and you've got to meet that. With natural gas, high density energy, we have no problem doing that. But if you remove fossil fuel from the equation, you've got quite a problem. It's very different. So, now we're talking about when we talk about decarbonization, they say, oh, great, we'll just electrify. Most of the countries got low emission electricity, low price. So based on that, they say we'll just electrify, but they don't understand what that will do to the electric system. Like most of the electric utilities, certainly in Ontario and the region, they're getting really scared now. With the heat pumps going in more and more, their peak load is jumping, and that's what determines capacity, but the utilization is also dropping. And this creates a very bad business situation for the industry. So next slide, please. Okay, as an illustration, and I must thank Martin for a lot of this work that he's done. If you look at the blue, you'll see the electric load, what it's been like for 2 years in Ontario. And then you look at the red, that's what it would look like if you put in air source heat pumps in the urban areas, ground source heat pumps in rural areas. Your peak loads change completely. So you're going from a peak load of about 23 to potentially a peak load of around 80. Uh, and right now, the utilization of capital, the capacity factor for electricity is about 67% in the Ontario system. We've calculated if you did your building heating for urban areas with air source heat pumps, ground source heat pumps in rural, then your utilization of capital would drop to about 26%. Now, there's nobody that can have great increases in capacity, but decreases like this of utilization without electricity prices going up. So it's really important to talk to your electricity system colleagues, start presenting them with these new heating loads that they might be faced with, and ask them what would happen to them. I know in Ontario and Ottawa, the CEO has said, we're looking forward to historic investments in our electric system because of soaring electricity demands. Okay. So this comes from various reasons, but the high peaky loads are coming from things like air source heat pumps, building heating. Next slide, please. Okay, now if you're not familiar with low duration curves, people in the thermal industry use them a lot. But if you imagine you took your load curve with hourly uh, points throughout the whole year, and then you took hour by hour, ranking them from the highest to the lowest, you get a curve something like shown in blue. So the 100% of peak load exists only for a short time, but you got to be there for it when they need it. But during the warmer weather, it drops off quite a bit. Now, that is what you got to deal with. That's very, very different than most of the loads that the electricity system has to handle today. Now, if you change that, let's say, electric heating load, that might be the blue line, to an air source heat pump load, you might be having the peak loads at the coldest weather are about the same. Um, but during warmer weather, it's less. So you still have to have a similar capacity, but your revenue, your energy sold drops a lot. So anyhow, air source, the straight heating, if you had electric heating, you might get 25% utilization of peak load. Switch to heat pumps and it may drop to 10. Customers like it, say, holy crow, look at all the savings we've got in energy. But they don't realize the electric utility has to supply a similar peak. So for the electric utilities, it's terrible business. And colleagues in the electric system modeled it, and they would see prices doubling, tripling, or even quadrupling in some places. Next slide, please. Okay, this one I thought I should show. We did a lot of work. Martin did most of this work, looking at the density in the different provinces, and you got density curves, something like that. And based on our consultation with our district energy specialists, it looked like about 70% of the buildings could be served by thermal networks, and then 30% that could not might be best served by ground source heat pumps or possibly, small biomass systems or whatever. Um, but I think it's important to um, notice about the ground source heat pumps. With a COP of about 4 compared to 1 peak for air source heat pumps, the electric utilities can get enormous peak reduction by going to ground source than rather than air source heat pumps. So if they look at it, there may be serious argument to put a lot more incentives to ground source heat pumps than we have. A lot of the policy people are treating them all the same, but for the electric industry, the utilities, it makes an enormous difference, like cutting their peak loads in a quarter if you're going to electrify heating. But anyhow, this is what we found in our study with district heating specialists, that it's possible about 70% of buildings may be served by thermal networks. Um, I should say one thing is that um, uh, right now, in some places, district heating or thermal networks can compete with gas. In other places, it's pretty tight, and the returns on investment are small. Other places, it may be more than gas, but if you wanted to decarbonize, you look at the alternatives to decarbonize, and we found it might be approximately half the cost of electrification of heating when you consider the full cost of the electric generator capacity increase, full cost of distribution system increases. Like if we look at Ontario, we've developed this system for, 100 years now or something. Then somebody's saying now you got to triple it by 2050. There aren't enough engineers and contractors around to do that, right? It's terrible. But policymakers are saying, hey, low emissions, cheap price, let's go for it. But the electric utilities are really worried. In fact, IESO, the Independent Electric Service Operator in Ontario, has only allowed in their planning for about 7% of buildings on heat pumps. So you've got this enormous disparity between policymakers and the people that are responsible for providing electricity. Okay. This isn't all absolute, but I think is good reason to think hard kick the tires, question some of the scenarios we're promoted with, including ours. And we really need to discuss this seriously and come to some agreement about how we move forward. Next slide, please. Hey, um, this, I hope this is comprehensible. On the left side, business option one, this is the current business model that the electric system, well, the nuclear generators have. They might have, I use an example from British Report, a input energy into the nuclear generator of about 500 megawatts, an output of electricity about 175, and the business they're looking at is give us base load, pump out 175, but the balance is wasted. Then you could say, well, come on, if we did a bit of planning, we could make these plants CHP ready, equip them with extraction ports in the turbine section, space for heat exchangers and piping. And if you were connected with a heat load to use the full output, you could have about a 350 megawatt peak load in business option two. You lose a bit of electricity. When you maximize your heat output, it might go from 175 to 125, but still it's better business. You're selling heat part of the year. But the third option is if you could sell all of the heat, like if you had large scale seasonal thermal energy storage, like they're doing in Finland right now and China even bigger, you could store the heat when you have surpluses and use that heat out of storage for peak. So your business, you could run from business option number one, just selling electricity, to business option three, where you're selling all of your heat and having a slight reduction in electricity, but you could potentially double the revenues at prices we think the industry might be able to pay for heat. But instead of doubling the revenue, the nuclear guys say, oh, we're not in the business of maximizing revenue. But if you use that heat revenue to decrease your electric prices, your electricity might become more affordable. So if you can look at the CHP model and thermal networks, your increase in capacity you require for electricity is much less than electrified heating. Plus, you're getting a revenue from your existing or proposed plants. But we just need to get our people comfortable that they can design and operate. But there are engineers working on this in Canada, and I think it's reasonable to see this in near future. Next slide, please. Okay, about the thermal storage. The reason thermal storage is so big, even if you had electricity supplied heat or cooling, uh, electricity is very expensive to store, and it only stores for hours, days at best, right? Whereas thermal storage, now they're storing it almost for a full year. In Vanta, Finland, they've got a 1 million cubic meter cavern that can store 90 gigawatt hours of heat. That is the equivalent to what a small city might use in a full year. So if you've got this thermal storage incorporated into your energy system, you can dump surplus electricity as heat rather than curtailing generation. And this will become more common as we get more renewables. You can take heat from variety sources, store it, take the enormous output from solar thermal facilities in the summer, store it for winter. And this is now all quite practical. I'm a judge or adjudicator for Euro Heat and Power is a Sustainable District Heating Award, and there's a lot of these going in Northern Europe right now. Uh, putting putting uh, putting heat in the storage and from various sources and using it. So it changes the economics. Now, I got a question there asking about elaborating on the natural gas. Um, I can touch on that now. We have talked to companies like Enbridge, and they're kind of watching, but they're keeping it close to their chest about what they think. Because in my position, I think they could switch from buying and distributing natural gas to buying and distributing thermal energy. Now, in Quebec, just across the border from where I live in Ottawa, the provincial government has said, we don't want any more natural gas heating. We're preparing for a decarbonized future, so no more. So the natural gas utility there, Gassy Fair, which is the Quebec version of Enbridge, they are now uh, looking at taking heat from a local paper mill in Gatineau and heating the east end of Gatineau with it. And they are treated like a think tank within Enbridge of possibly pointing in the direction of where they will go. Um, there's a number of discussions. I know that Enbridge is looking at things like this, but they're not ready yet to declare, yeah, we're prepared. But if this could happen, the gas utilities, Enbridge, can move to seeing them losing business to electric heat pumps in the short term, to actually retaining their customers by providing heat, retaining the customers, providing the service. They may retain gas in the short term, but then this could be replaced as the loads get bigger with biomass, waste heat, heat from CHP plants, or whatever. Okay, next slide, please. But I really think this thermal energy storage is warrants a lot of attention. Now, as I said, nuclear and electric utilities are comfortable with baseload electric production, and they're resisting change. Uh, they do have concerns. They're legitimate, but they've worked on them and resolved them elsewhere. We can do it in Canada. What's interesting is a Mott MacDonald study from the UK Energy Technology Institute. They believe that if you get into these plants at the design stage, to put additional extraction ports in the turbine section and allow space for piping, heat exchangers, it may be less than 0.2% of incremental capital costs. Now, if you look at the cost overruns of most nuclear plants, this is virtually zero, right? So we're trying to encourage governments to set policies because governments are the one that are putting a lot of money into nuclear power. And if we can get them to require that all nuclear plants, in fact, any thermal electric generator, be CHP ready for the future. Okay, so we've got a lot of major generating stations coming online in the coming years, but a lot of them are at the point where they're making design decisions is happening now in weeks, months. So it's quite urgent we get this done because once you miss this window of getting a decision at the design stage, it becomes much more costly potentially, but also your ability to optimize is a lot less. Like in studies we did earlier from Pickering, you can go at the crossover pipe between the high pressure and low pressure turbines. You might be able to cut into that, but then you've got heat at a single temperature and pressure, and you can't optimize it, move it like you could if you had several extraction ports. And the lower, I can't go into this too much detail now, but the lower the temperature of heat you extract, the further the steam is going through the turbines, the less electric you lose. So if you're providing heat at 70 degrees, let's say, which is a common temperature in Scandinavia for a supply temperature, you lose 1 unit of electricity for about 12 or 14 units of heat upgraded from waste heat to 70-degree heat. That means you could sell heat at 1/12 of the cost you require for electricity and you break even. If you charge more than that, you could actually make more money than selling electricity alone. You can always come back to that later. Next slide, please. Okay, so if we can get into the thermal energy system integrating sector coupling of electric and thermal systems, we can get unprecedented reductions in greenhouse gases. The nuclear power plants are more cost effective, potentially increasing revenues or cutting electric prices a lot. The smaller SMR and MMR plants, they're becoming increasingly expensive. They've moved from $10,000 a kilowatt a couple of years ago. Now they're talking about 15 or 17,000 a kilowatt. Very pricey, but if you had heat revenue, that might allow them to be implemented sooner by being located near and closer to both heat and electric loads. The electric generator increases from 33 to about 90% efficiency. And then once you have this network with the network and the thermal storage, you've opened the door. It's like a catalyst for now going after more renewable energy, more waste heat from other sources. And like I said, in the end, this might potentially increase the utilization, decrease capacity requirements in the electric system, and give you cheaper long-term prices in electricity. It's really important to realize that if you bump up the electric system capacity like 2 times, 3 times, our electricity system today was built in 1940, 50, 60, whatever dollars. And now we're going to try and replace all that with 2020 or $2030. This gives you totally different economics, and the electricity price is going to be very different. Okay, so that's the point there. Next slide, please. Okay, for your reference, the Boltzmann Institute, Martin's my colleague in this, a fellow director. We did a two-pathway study. There's an executive summary that summarizes all of this. It's got links to the main study. The main two pathways report is available at the second link, and that'll give you a substantial report comparing electricity and thermal network operation. In it, we also provided specific reports for most of the electricity local distribution companies to show the impact on their systems if you electrify versus thermal networks. So we're just soliciting background from them now. We have been working very closely with the Ontario Society of Professional Engineers. They have one of the best electricity system analysts around, Paul Accioni, and they have worked very closely with us. And the Ontario Society of Professional Engineers, they have made thermal networks a major advocacy priority in this current year. So, and they've been writing to federal and provincial ministers. And if you look at their position paper, I think you'll find that quite interesting. So gradually, we're hoping that we'll get more and more people comfortable, and then we can start moving on to systems like other countries have a standard. Denmark, Sweden, about 60, 70%. Big cities like Copenhagen, Helsinki, Stockholm, about 98% of the city is served as this, including subdivisions and suburbs. And maybe there's a lot of innovation possible too. As a last point, may I could quickly mention an example from China. They have a nuclear power plant. I think it's an AP1000 US-based technology. They use it, the heat, to desalinate water. Now they've got hot desalinated water. They pipe it as far as, in a single pipe, as far as 125 kilometers. And then at the end, they take the heat out for the city's district heating system, and then they put the cooler water into their water supply because they have a fresh water shortage internally. But it's incredible the innovation that's possible and it's happening all over the world now. And there's no reason why Canadian engineers can't do this, and no reason why Canadian policymakers shouldn't be catching up to what's going on in the rest of the world so we can update our technology and potentially lead. Okay, with that, I'd say thank you very much. And I'm sorry for the disorganization in getting online, but I'm
Oh, look,
honored to
we've
be on.
adapted well. This has come
Yeah,
together very nicely, Michael. Thank you very much. I'm going to ask you
yeah,
though a question, then I'm going to open up to the panel.
sure.
I'm sure they've got questions as well. It's apparent that the renewal of nuclear is one of the drivers of thinking about what we probably should have been thinking about in the past, and that is if But if we're going to be building new nuclear plants, it's timely to take CHP into consideration. That's a major point, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Are you connected with CNL, with Blair Bromley and the crew?
Yeah, I am.
Okay.
Um, uh, Bob Baker,
Yeah.
former CEO,
Yeah.
he's in our team. We've been
Okay.
working promoting this.
Okay.
Um, we work with ACL and CNL now. They've
Okay.
got products like Slowpoke and nuclear batteries, so they're very interested. We're working with them to do a presentation in June to the International District Energy Association on developments in Canada. This is really important because AECL, while they've divested or sold off their CANDO assets to Atkins, Realis, and others, um, they still are an important source of advice to the federal government. So I think this is a very important development.
Okay, excellent. Now I'm going to jump right into questions, which I'm going to pose to you, Michael, and the panel as a whole. So, Leigh, Martin, Roger, you're on, and I'll call on Martin first with the first question. We've been talking about energy and intelligence as one and the same story. So I'm going to bring AI now into the game as one of the forecast drivers of the consumption or demand for energy. How do you see AI changing the way energy systems are designed? I mean, it's apparent we're going to be thinking energy for some time and electricity in particular. So, you want to comment at all about the relevance? Is this a lot of hype, or is there something real about this discussion or this concern we have about whether or not we can maintain and even supply the amount of energy that's going to get called for? Martin, you want to weigh in on this?
Yeah, so I don't think it's hype. I think that there's great potential for using artificial intelligence systems to assist us in the design of our integrated energy systems, looking at all aspects. This is a very big problem. All right, it's a big space we're addressing. We're looking at energy for all of society, for all our purposes, and we need to optimize that somehow, as opposed to just looking at, we need electricity, so we'll build a nuclear power plant and we'll produce electricity with it and we'll throw away the heat. So it's really it's an optimization problem. Michael spoke to efficiency. Well, it's an efficiency problem. As a physicist, I look at this and I say, well, energy is conserved. We don't ever destroy energy. We don't ever create energy. It's absolutely conserved. The fuel is not conserved. We can consume fuel, but all we're doing is converting energy from one form to another. And once we consume our nuclear fuel to produce heat, we're using some of that heat to produce electricity, and then we're throwing away the rest. All right. And
But I got to ask this, Michael. I mean, we're talking about demand being very quick. This transition that's underway right now, data centers are being built the size of football fields or cities,
Yeah.
putting demand on systems today. Do we have the time to build the capital infrastructure for nuclear CHP in order to meet this demand? Are we already falling behind?
Well, uh, what I'm seeing is, yeah, we got a problem about electric supply. I'm not the expert on that, but I hear it all the time. We're really worried about that, not just generation, but also distribution capacity, enormous
Right.
load. So what we're seeing is like Google has been contracting with US SMR, MMR supplier to start saying, okay, if we can't get that capacity off the grid, maybe we should start contracting for small nuclear units
Yeah.
to power it. So, but this reinforces if you want to be efficient, you've not only got the maybe 100 megawatts more of heat being rejected from the data center, but you've also got the heat rejected from the SMR or MMR that might be powering this. So there's several different options, but if let's say the thermal energy system people and the electricity system people can work together and figure out what options may be available, that would be good. But I don't think that discussion's happening yet.
Well,
but it is.
if that discussion isn't happening yet, and we've got a problem sitting right around the corner, that discussion is going to be irrelevant. cooperation or collaboration in the moment of a crisis or the moment of a presumed crisis means people are going to take the solutions they've got today and not wait for the future.
Yeah.
Mark?
This is a problem in North America, I would say. In Europe, they do have this discussion going on. They've got lots of research going on. They're looking at integrated energy systems, but it's
Mhm.
not yet happening in North America because we've had cheap fossil fuel. Uh,
Right.
and as that changes, we're going to have that discussion, or else those data centers are going to show up in Europe. And the data centers that are being built in Europe are supplying their heat, their waste heat, for thermal networks. I mean, it's just they know what the what the opportunity is, and it saves them an enormous amount of water. They don't have uh, water evaporating off the roof in the cooling towers to cool these data centers. They're sending the heat into the thermal network. So there's
Yeah.
big benefits to do that.
A principle of change management is pain. And it
Yes.
Yeah.
seems to me that Europe has recognized earlier with the threats of Russia and their dependence and renewables and climate change. And Europe's taken energy sovereignty seriously because their sovereignty is threatened. North America, with its supply of with fracking and oil and plenty of oil sands, means we're going to be late to the game because we haven't felt that our sovereignty is in any way threatened.
Yeah.
But the
Uh,
pain that's being felt now in the United States is water.
Right.
And these data centers require an enormous amount of water for the cooling, and it's going to be a serious problem for them.
Well, that's a topic we haven't touched on in the series taking us through into December, which is sovereignty as it relates to water, which Canada is well aware of the United States dependency, and this is not new, but it's going to get increasingly serious.
mm.
Leigh, you've had some experience with integrating energy systems. Do you want to weigh in on your perspective on what's being shared here?
Sure. I have to be honest, when I first read some of the material that was coming out before the webinar here, I thought I was going to be in total disagreement with what Michael was going to present, but I'm not. My background is as a contractor selling ground source heat pump systems. Um, to me, I have a hate on for air source heat pumps because of what you mentioned about COPs, especially in Edmonton. Um, Our COPs here for air source heat pumps is probably about 1.3. And on the other hand, ground source heat pumps, we get 4.7, which Roger can attest to because he's got one in his house doing that. And I'm also thinking that if you can make these thermal networks work, then ground source heat pumps, which really run off water, could run off the water coming from a thermal network, as
Mhm.
well as the water coming out of the pipes out of a ground source heat pump system. They're really water source heat pumps, not ground source heat pumps per se. So to me, if you married a ground source heat pump with a thermal energy network like what you're talking about, that would be the perfect world of optimizing all of the heat coming off of the system and using the minimum amount of electricity.
Mhm. Yeah. Could I make one quick comment? One of the biggest problems we've seen is that Canada has had cheap gas. They've also not felt any problem with security of supply. So everybody's very comfortable doing what they do, right? And so in any system, including district heating systems, a lot of the people are involved in old steam systems and they don't want to change. Uh, People in the nuclear industry are used to selling electricity, base load, that's it. And we've become a little bit lazy. And this is a big barrier to Canada. If we want to be internationally competitive, we got to pull up our socks and start worrying about some of these things. Otherwise, we're going to be left behind and import everything.
So our premier here in Alberta thinks that maybe we should build a natural gas pipeline from Alberta to the coast and get rid of natural gas. Would that raise the price enough of natural gas to maybe start making people's mind change a little bit? I know that's a weird way of looking at it, but uh, maybe that's what we need to do. Maybe she's on to something there. I
Yeah.
don't agree with her most days, but I'm just throwing that out there.
Yeah. Well, I think maybe you can twist that around a little bit and hold it up as an opportunity. Every time you use rejected heat from industry or power plants to displace gas, you're freeing up gas to export at higher prices. And so, uh, in thermal networks and a lot of things in engineering are kind of complex, and the arguments people are receptive to, they're different, whether it's a policymaker, an economist, a power plant operator. So you've got to be able to hone your argument to the different audiences and change gears.
Politicians are prone to not want to create fear and anxiety. They like complacency. They like status quo, maintain things as they are. The last thing we seem to have in Canada is leadership about the future. We
Mhm.
seem to want to celebrate how well off we are, which leads and reinforces this complacency. So I point to leadership at a time when change is called for, when the
Yeah.
symptoms are not yet evident, but to get ahead of the curve, which is what this discussion and what this whole series is all about. And what Donald Trump, like it or not, like forget his style, but the point that he's making is our complacency is really a threat to our sovereignty. And there are many
Mhm.
issues that we have internally, not just interprovincial trade, but what you're pointing out is the waste of our heat and the lack of relevance for being prepared for the future.
Yeah. Like a very simple example I'd say is, let's say you needed 1,000 megawatts of heat, uh, and you're like in Toronto, you're next to a nuclear generating station. You've got a choice. Do you want to take the heat rejected from your existing plant, or do you want to build another plant to so you can heat it with electricity? It's economically, it's stupid. If we've got to deal with this massive waste problem.
But the energy industry itself, I mean, it was Eric Newell that said to me, harvest while the sun is shining. As long as oil is in demand and revenue is being made, you're not going to find the electricity industry or the oil and gas industry becoming advocates for what they need to do to change, unless you hit them hard and then they get into decarbonization. But we've warned that energy is fast becoming the currency of intelligence. That's the AI piece. In an era where computation drives global power, where we're seeing this need to recognize better integration of our existing energy sources and recognizing that change isn't that far off what can we do in order to wake up our leaders? Roger, anything you want to share here of your perspective on the politics of energy?
Yeah, well, first of all, I totally agree with we need to look at overall system efficiency instead of any one little part of our energy generation. And maybe part of what we have is a marketing issue. I think of Steve Jobs, and we didn't know we needed an iPhone until he told us we did. So maybe approaching this in that way, getting information at a level that municipal governments, provincial governments, utilities commissions, and so on can understand it. So it's not always in the engineering environment. Um, I know that's not a very technical approach, but I think we need to garner support first for
Well,
this. Okay.
anytime, Roger, we've taken positions or policy positions for change forward to government. Government has typically said, is industry on board? They want to make sure there's a partner out there, that they're not advocating for something that is going to be contrary, and that they're going to find themselves in a freaking argument with the economy.
Yeah.
How do you get your leaders to wake up to the fact that somebody needs to lead here? These discussions are happening in the weeds. They're quasi-academic. When do they begin to feel real pain? I think this AI and these data centers is going to be a wake-up call. You emphasize, everybody here has reinforced it, that if this drive for energy coming from these massive data centers and the appetite for intelligence at the trillions of dollars that are being expended, that may well in fact be not just the threat we're looking for, but the opportunity.
Yeah. Good. One thing I would say in my experience with, I suppose, advocacy lobbying is that our political leaders, the one thing you can try and cajole them, give them information, but for the reasons Perry said, they often don't act unless they see industry comfortable with it or something. But the other thing important too is if they are also very worried about missing the boat, if there's something important happening going on that they should be responsible for and it's happening without them being involved, they get a bit worried. So in a sense, it's maybe useful to scare them a bit. If you can show momentum by getting some of the key players together and see it's receptive, and then focusing on getting change wherever you can, and then going back. They don't want to be left out.
Well, there is a wake up on nuclear revitalization. There is a wake up of data centers and the consumption of energy. But we've got to get energy to come forward and say there are some things that we can do with what we have today if we'd only better integrate what we've got. That doesn't seem to be a terribly complex message and one that the bureaucrats ought to be able to handle. I'm not sure we need to go that high to the top. If what we have is the need to integrate what we already have, we ought to be able to do that within existing policy. It's this nuclear. If nuclear is doing what appears, what is apparent, and nuclear is going to be the next source, the next new source, and we should be putting CHP together now. That's got to be part of Blair Bromley's argument and those in CNL. Peter?
Okay, so well, the project that Michael's been outlining, actually, as I mentioned in the early comments, and Martin as well, that we have been involved in this since 2023. And one of the things that we did, or we were fortunate to have happen, is we were invited to present our ideas as somewhat like what Michael has presented to the Canadian Nuclear Association's annual conference. And being that it's a major international conference for the nuclear power industry, many others were here from around the world. And one of the groups that was here was people from the World Nuclear News, which is the Bible publication of the nuclear industry. And they ran a feature article on our project. And so that gave us a piece of ammo, independently produced in a recognized publication on the very subject we were talking about, to use as a tool when we talk to politicians or the industry itself. So that's another way or write op-eds is another way to promote the initiatives that you might wish to try and drive.
Yeah.
Mom and Pop from Rimby is what Peter Lougheed used to point to when he was working with cabinet to try and get his discussion at a level that Mom and Pop from Rimby would understand. When did Mom and Pop from Rimby begin to feel some pain?
They begin to feel their pain in Toronto when the city of Toronto tells them that they're not allowed to replace their natural gas furnace with a new natural gas furnace, that they have to install a heat pump.
Mhm.
And then they go and they talk to the electricians and so on. They say, well, you need an upgraded electrical service. And they talk to Toronto Hydro, and Toronto Hydro says, sorry, we're at capacity in your area. And so it's January and the furnace is red tagged and you're not allowed to put another furnace. And where you're going to get your electricity from for a heat pump. That hasn't really hit yet, but that's Toronto's plan for 2028.
I think that if I get it right, that has been happening in Great Britain.
Yes.
Mhm.
As Great Britain was on a roll, heat pumps of the future, and all of a sudden the existing infrastructure found and the policies were in conflict. So yes, conflict is the source of pain that I'm looking for. But I'm also looking for the collaboration, and that's your point of working with CNL and working with others that are advocating for nuclear at a time when nuclear is coming back on board. We haven't even discussed fusion and whether or not that arrives in time to be relevant. I mean, that could change the whole game altogether.
Mhm.
Well, I wouldn't hold my breath on that one. I think that if we get to economical fusion by 2050, I'll be very surprised.
Well, as you know, I sit on that. Anyway.
Yes.
Yeah. Stay tuned. That's all I'm going to say. Stay tuned.
Me too.
I mean, AI came a lot faster than anybody really believed, and within 3 years, we've had a hiccup, a big hiccup. If fusion does what it appears to be doing, the momentum continues to evolve. We may have the surprise around the corner as well. So let's keep our eyes open. Let's not turn something off. I know it's always been easy to say you're holding your breath. Go ahead, Martin.
So I'd like to come back to the intelligence
Yeah.
side of the thing. And, we've been talking about artificial intelligence. I'd like to talk about human intelligence. And as a physicist, I've had the luxury, I'll say, since I took early retirement, to be involved in research at the Perimeter Institute in Waterloo, which is a wonderful institute with incredible amount of manpower, or brain power,
Mhm.
people studying cosmology and quantum phenomena and so on at a theoretical level, and some of them are involved in observational things, but it's this enormous amount of intellectual capacity. And I look at that regularly and I think, well, if we had just a tiny fraction of that devoted to looking at our national energy problem, we would be so much further ahead. There is this, there's a big gap between what goes on in the scientific research, in particular in physics and astronomy and so on, and what I'm seeing in our energy industries quite
Martin,
broadly.
our article this next coming week is about the politicization of everything, which is the emergence of populism.
Yeah.
We are not expecting government to do any thinking anymore. They purged the public sector, and they're continuing to do so in the research sector, where knowledge was a prerequisite to policy formulation.
Yep,
Now it's a survey. Now it's a
it
consumer
is.
survey. A sentiment survey is driving policy. And government wanted that way. The politicians said, we are fed up with public servants manipulating politicians. Politicians are elected by the public. Populism is on a roll globally. Good luck.
Okay, so but I've got a son and daughter-in-law who are working in Nottingham on fundamental physics, gravitational waves, applications of AI in that space.
Yeah.
I've got another son in Berlin who's working on these fundamental things. There are no opportunities for them to work in that space in Canada, and there are no opportunities for that brain power to come back and work in uh, a practical environment where they would apply their capability to solving these big problems that we're
Look,
discussing.
we had a prime minister that was prescient. He saw the future. The future is feelings. It has
Yes,
nothing to do with brain power. It had nothing to do with brain power.
but
Hopefully, the current prime minister, hope burns eternal, has woken up to the fact that brain power is critical, and that the issue is one of collaboration and how do you get the various forces together to override this penchant for populism.
yeah. So in order for us to make use of artificial intelligence, we're going to
Yes.
have to bring much more of that intelligence, human intelligence, in, and
Yeah.
employ them, vet them,
I, I
move
for one,
forward.
and I think the network as a whole see AI as the new player and maybe the salvation. We
AI is
may
not
have
going
more faith in AI than we have in our politicians.
to.
Roger, is that finger up?
Yeah, it was. Just one of the things Peter had questioned earlier was a similar question or a similar comment I had, considering the new prime minister we have, and that is maybe bringing some of the thermal pathways, some of these alternative answers for energy generation to that Carney government and place it in this current new,
Yeah,
green
Roger.
push he has,
Yeah.
and maybe leverage that policy and whatever marketing and exposure that can be taken from that would be one. And
Like,
another item, so that's one. Another item that I was reminded when Martin was on, when we just briefly touched a while back about the AI centers. And one of the things there would be some relatively easy policy, I think, and technical capability would be AI centers must use closed loop water cooling systems and are not allowed to use chillers and evaporators, period. That gets rid of the water problem, and those AI centers waste heat needs to be used and applied in the area, provide energy within the area that they exist. So just quickly, technically it's quite possible because all of the new chips, even the latest NVIDIA chips and that are quite capable of operating without being throttled at temperatures of 60, 65 degrees Celsius exiting coolant temperatures. So that is easy. That is a great temperature to recover and use in a thermal pathway. And at the same time, we get rid of the absolute waste water, particularly in certain regions. Lastly, you could still cool an AI center in Arizona with a 65-degree exiting water temperature, even if you've got a 40-degree ambient temperature. There's still enough exchange, and you could do it without evaporation or without chillers. So there's just one example of let's reduce our load somewhat.
That's a good summary, Roger. I saw a lot of nodding heads there, and I don't think they're sleeping. Michael?
Yeah, I just like to mention to encourage you is that I did write to the Prime Minister in August. I read his book, Values. I really respected his thinking mostly, except on page 265, he said we have to electrify everything, including heating, I think. So I wrote to him and said, hey, I appreciate your leadership, great book, but I'm concerned about this, and this is why. And I went through my arguments. Yeah, he's a smart guy. Anyhow, I didn't hear from him directly, but very shortly after, I got a letter from, well, about a month after, a letter from the Minister of Energy. Further to your letter, okay, and he said, yes, with this government is fully behind nuclear power. Yes, using heat from nuclear power seems like very sensible policy. And we will review your two pathways report, this report Boltzmann System did comparing things, and we will arrange a meeting with you when the minister's schedule permits, once he's finished with the Trump antics or whatever. So I think
Can I get a copy of that letter?
oh yeah, I could get that for you.
You send
And
that to me?
yeah, because I think the really important thing is the political system is what it is, but if you use good arguments and bring things to their attention, they won't get looked at by everybody, but somewhere in there's a vulnerability. They're concerned about it, right?
Well,
And they will listen.
well,
And
thanks for sharing that. I mean, it's easy to be cynical, looking for opportunities and where there's a crack, where there's an opening. So thank you. I would like to see that letter. There's some people I'd like to share it with. Peter?
yeah.
I just wanted to add that Michael actually had a meeting as part of that chain he just outlined with the senior advisor to the minister earlier yesterday afternoon.
And who was it had that meeting?
Michael.
Yeah. And on behalf of Ontario Society of Professional Engineers.
So they did follow up. They did follow up.
Yeah. Well, what we did is we've had two letters going in, very similar. One from the Boltzmann Institute that I wrote to the Prime Minister, and then we had other letters going in from the Ontario Society of Professional Engineers.
Do you know Axel Mason?
I'm sorry, I don't.
Okay, he's the president of Fusion Energy Canada Consortium, etc.
Yeah, okay.
I'm going to introduce you to Axel. Blair Bromley and he work closely. Blair's on the board. Jeff Kramer, your turn.
Yeah, so there's been a lot of talk about water and stuff, and I just want to point out Canada does not have a problem with water, and we don't even have to evaporate it. We can just run a cooling system into a lake and have as much cooling as we want. So that's one of the benefits that Canada has with regard to AI. But the other thing that I wanted to mention was nuclear power traditionally has used water as the working fluid. So basically you pressurize steam, get it to 350 degrees or something like that. And then the low end of that is around the boiling point, which is of course 100 degrees C. So the thermal efficiency of that process is limited by the temperature difference of the hot end and the cold end in absolute temperature. So that's the absolute hot end temperature minus the absolute cold end temperature divided by the absolute hot end temperature. Now, in Canada, we have a huge advantage. Now, we don't normally think of this as being an advantage, but a huge advantage when it comes to thermal efficiency, in that for half the year, we got a temperature that's, close to zero or less. So we can drop that 100-degree temperatures for the condensation point of water, use a secondary working fluid, and take advantage of that additional temperature drop and increase the overall efficiency of that process. And in the Arctic, we can get temperatures as low as minus 60 degrees C. If you use a secondary process like using propane or ethane as a working fluid. And that's, of course, what I write about in my book. And I specifically say that nuclear would be a great option as an input energy source. And then you can use the ocean temperature to reheat the water and cool it in the cold atmosphere above the ocean, and essentially get a huge amount of energy, but improve on the energy that you would get from a nuclear process. And of course, you can run that system without the nuclear energy to begin with. It's just lower efficiency.
I love to have engineers at the table. It's getting politicians on board. Go ahead,
Yeah.
Michael.
Good. Just quick point. Actually, at the back end of the turbines and the condensers, they're usually condensing about 30 or 40 degrees. So it's way below the normal atmospheric boiling point, and it creates a vacuum. So you get a lot more output from your turbine. So that's the case. And you're right. If you have other working fluids, you can use the lower grade heat and generate more power. But then that varies during the year. So there's been a fair bit of work that done around the world, but still they're inclined to reject the steam at the lowest possible temperature, condense about 30 or 40, maximize the regular Rankine cycle system.
Okay, well,
Oh,
we're
let me
into
put
wrap.
it one quick other thing.
Yeah.
You talk about all the capacity to absorb heat in the environment, but we're already getting kickback from the First Nations around Bruce Nuclear because of the excessive heat being rejected. Now, when you look at the power plant like Pickering, once they have 2,000 megawatts of electricity coming out, that's 4,000 megawatts of heat. And they're going to be doing that again at Darlington or whatever. So these are not trivial amounts of heat we're dumping into the environment. So if we can use it, cascade it through heating systems or whatever, we can reduce the thermal load on the environment as well.
We haven't really talked about the capital costs of making change. Has that been calculated into your efficiencies?
As part of our study, yes, we
Okay.
looked at the capital costs, and we say that we could heat buildings with thermal networks for about half of the cost of electricity. That's primarily capital costs, both for electricity and for thermal networks.
Okay.
The
I mean, the usage of thermal power for heating is established in Iqaluit in the Northwest Territories. This is not new. I don't know whether they're using off their diesel power and they're taking the heat off the engines, but they're using thermal power to heat their communities as well. So we've got examples. We've been early players there. Michael, I'm in the wrap up, by the way. Let's make
Okay, sorry. Just very quickly, the diesel generators it's fixed, the amount of heat coming off and the amount of power coming out. With steam turbines, it's very, very different because basically, if you could use the waste heat coming out the end at 40 degrees, you lose no electricity. But if you extract the steam higher up at, let's say, 70 degrees, you lose 1 unit of electricity for about 12 units of heat upgraded. So it's like a heat pump backwards, right? And if you want a higher temperature, then let's say at about 120 degrees, you might lose 1 unit of electricity for about 4 or 5 units of heat. So it's really important if we can lower the temperatures required to heat buildings, lower the heating of the distribution systems, because it makes a big, big difference to the power plant. Whereas if you had a cogen plant like Iqaluit, it doesn't matter whether you use it at maximum or lower temperature, the amount coming off is fixed. Anyhow, but your point's important. We got a history of using it.
Well, thank you. Peter McKinnon, and then I'm going to call on each of the panelists to give me their perspective as we wrap up. Peter?
Yes, thank you, Perry. I just wanted to mention that I just added in the chat a link to the World Nuclear News story that preceded this presentation.
Okay, thank you. I'll cite that in the summary for the YouTube recording. I'll start with you, Roger. Roger, any concluding comments or perspectives you want to share?
Well, a very general one, in as much as we need to start taking some lessons from nature overall, in as much as there's no such really thing as a waste. Everything's recycled or repurposed, and look at that as opportunity instead of waste heat as a problem, or
Yeah.
as any other form of energy as a problem, or strictly the benefits of one without looking at the whole system of energy. Might be benefit right now for nat gas, but for a short period of time, and that also prevents us from gaining some opportunities in other areas that would make us globally more competitive. So yeah, sorry, just generally, and we need to convey that, I think, out. We need to convey to the public, we have these other options, they're there. And because I don't know that it can be pushed just from the engineering side. That's just a general thought.
Well, the fact that climate change has elevated the relevance of energy and how we produce it and how we use it, and the concepts of pollution may mean that our youth are ready to receive arguments of this nature and carry this forward. Maybe the youth will be, in fact, not the fearmongers, but the ones that buy into the relevance of this as a solution. Leigh, your turn.
Well, I'm gonna still promote ground source heat pumps. Until we can get another network set up. That to me is the best solution. I mean, and the people that are making the decisions, homeowners or commercial building owners, they're looking for solutions right now. Um, so to me, now that I'm aware of this, I'm going to study it a little bit more, obviously. But here in Edmonton, I'm having a hard time visualizing uh, where we could store, the thermal energy and how it would be stored. That's the ground stores heat right now, and ground stored heat pumps take advantage of that. So I'm just trying to figure out how we could store the thermal energy from a power plant that's 40 miles away.
Okay, well, I know Michael's got his finger up. We're going to hold off, Michael. You can give
Yeah,
yours
okay, sure.
in your wrap up. Martin, your turn.
Yeah.
Okay, very quickly respond to the storage. There are lots of options, but the simplest one is in fact borehole fields, and you can store vast amounts of energy in borehole fields and under buildings, under parks, under school grounds, and you can send heat 40 kilometers into the city to store it, or you can store some near the source and some near the destination. That's a design problem, but the capacity is going to be there. We can do it for Toronto. I'm sure you can do it for Edmonton.
Good.
My general observation is that we need to move into a mode of thinking holistically, not looking at individual problems. And we need to recognize that there are bounds. So we can't just say, oh, we're going to build in the United States 90 gigawatts of new data centers. This is a pipe dream, and people are beginning to realize this is a pipe dream, and this is why the market goes down in for these tech companies, because they don't have the power. And they won't. You can't build the power system that quickly. So we have to start thinking more carefully about our uses of energy. We have to conserve it, and when it comes to computer systems and so on, we have to think, much more carefully in our design of those systems, as opposed to saying, well, we've got these GPUs and we'll just scale those up, use lots of them. We're going to need to put a lot more thought into doing it creatively. A recent paper I read points out that the human brain uses about 20 watts. And
we drew that parallel in an earlier newsletter. Yeah, think global but act local. We need some demonstrations of what we're talking about here, that people can actually see the results of what we're talking about at a metropolitan level.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Michael. Thank you, Martin. Michael, you got the last word.
Okay, just a very brief one. There's a lot of innovation going on that we're not widely aware of. For example, there's a Toronto company that's been working closely with tunneling contractors, underground infrastructure, but also oil and gas drillers. And they have now developed technology where they can go into an underground parking lot with about 7 feet clearance and drill holes down about 200 or 300 meters deep. Okay. And this now they're involved in an international project through the IEA that's going to focus on underground thermal energy storage in urban areas. So I'd say keep your eye out. Thermal storage is probably one of the biggest things, and these things are coming down the path.
We're already doing that. We're drilling in parkades.
Good, good, great.
Well, I want to thank all of you. This was comprehensive. It was insightful. We touched on the politics of energy. We recognize that energy sovereignty is fundamental, and that there are drivers that are making it increasingly relevant. So I thank all of you for your input today. Michael Wiggin for being able to get zoomed in and
Sorry
overcoming
about
those
that.
technologies. That was a beginning. So thank you, Martin, for joining us. Thank you, Leigh, for your input, and Roger for that excellent overview.